Here's everything you need to know about tuning carburetors, specifically with pilot air mixture screws. Before we get started, here's a timestamp list for all of the sections that I'll be covering today, in case you just need to focus on a certain part of the process. If you have one with a fuel mixture screw, I'll have a video going more in depth on those soon, but most of this video will still apply. If you don't know which type of mixture screw you have, the general rule is that if it's located on the engine side of the slide, then it's a fuel mixture screw, meaning that it meters the amount of fuel let into the pilot circuit. So loosening the screw gives more fuel and tightening gives less fuel. However, if you find the screw is on the airbox side of the carb slide, then it meters air into the pilot jet circuit. So on these, loosening adds more air and tightening restricts air. And that's the type we're going to be tuning today. I should add that there are a few exceptions to this rule. For example, the Amal concentrics found on old British bikes, as well as the mini bike PZ19 carb, both have air mixture screws on the engine side of the carburetor slide. So this video will apply to those as well. There are even a few carburetors that have both types of adjusters, like these Mikuni VM26s found on a few models from the 1970s. Tuning those just takes knowing how to adjust and balance both. When in doubt, you can also tell by removing the mixture screw entirely, and if it has a very pointed tip and an O-ring, then it's a fuel metering screw. And if it has a blunt tip and often no O-ring, then it's an air screw. All of these carbs share the same 3-circuit design, regardless of mixture screw or slide type. There's the pilot circuit that consists of a pilot jet and a mixture screw that, in our case today, meters air. Then there's the mid-range circuit that uses a combination of the needle, emulsion tube, and slide cutaway to give a smooth transition from the pilot into the third and final main circuit. This one is simply metered by the main jet for wide open throttle. For tuning these circuits, I always start with the pilot because it isn't influenced by the other circuits, but it does have an influence on the mid-range. So if you started messing with the mid first, you might have to do it again after dialing in the pilot. Once that's set up, we'll do the main circuit next because it also isn't affected much by the others, but it has an even bigger influence on the mid-range than the pilot does. Finally, we can dial in the mid-range to get the smoothest transition from the pilot to the main circuit. Today I'll be using this 4-carb Suzuki as a tuning example, and I'll only be showing making adjustments to one carb for simplicity, but in reality, with multiple carb racks like this, you need to make the same adjustments to each carb as you tune. The goal is to have all carburetors acting perfectly in unison. So let's get started with tuning the pilot circuit. First, we want to set the air mixture screws at 1.5 turns out from lightly seated, and fire it up to set the idle around 1400 RPM for most bikes. If your bike doesn't have a tach, you can set the idle by ear, listening for a low but steady idle, or tachs can be had for cheap that get a reading off of the coil wire. You can also get a carb sync tool, which gives an RPM reading based on the vacuum pulses. This is convenient because you'll need to sync multi-carb setups before tuning them anyway. Once the bike is warmed up, make sure that you have a fan blowing on the engine to keep it from overheating. Now it's time to determine if the pilot circuit is too rich or too lean. Both of these extremes will make the idle rougher, but some giveaways for an overly lean mixture is a throttle response that feels delayed. Also, the RPMs will start to hang before dropping back down to idle, or at least drop more slowly. When it's too lean, you also might notice some popping or crackling from the exhaust on deceleration. I would describe a lean idle as dry or weak, but it's a feeling that takes some experimentation to get familiar with. On an overly rich mixture, the RPMs will drop quickly but fall below idle and then creep back up. Or if the idle isn't set high enough, it may just want to drop down and stall the engine. When far overly rich, you'll notice black smoke coming from the exhaust or even smell unburned fuel in the exhaust fumes. A rich idle has a blubbering, wet feel to it, and it might bog and stumble when you blip the throttle before picking up RPMs, which admittedly does feel very similar to the lean delay I described earlier, but it's these subtle differences that you really just have to get a feel for. For the mixture screw, the adjustable range is between 1 and 3 turns out from lightly seated. Depending on the rich or lean symptoms, you can experiment with adjusting the screw in quarter-turn increments in the direction you think it needs to go. After making an adjustment, blip the throttle and let the bike idle for a few seconds to settle into the new ratio. Listen to the idle. Did it go up or down? If it went down, you were already too far in that direction, so this means that you need to go the other way. If the idle goes up, that's a good sign. Reset the idle using the idle screw. Now repeat the process, adjusting the mixture screw in the better direction until the idle just starts to drop off or get inconsistent. Then go back half a turn and check the response for crispness and a quick return to steady idle without hanging or dropping too low. It isn't only about idle though. Keep checking the throttle response as you blip the throttle. Remember on these, turning out leans the air-fuel ratio by adding more air, while turning in richens it by restricting air. Something to think about is that we're tuning the pilot circuit not only for idle, but also up to about a quarter turn of the throttle, which is actually really important because that's where you feather the clutch to start going and can spend a lot of time at cruising speeds. So if the engine stumbles anytime that you try to lightly accelerate, you know your pilot circuit still needs to be dialed in. Now when it comes to the pilot jet, for the vast majority of motorcycles with just intake or exhaust mods, you don't need to change it out. This is because around idle, the influence of exhaust and airbox restrictions are minimal at most, and I find that the mixture screws usually have plenty of adjustment to account for those mods. Of course, as with everything, there are exceptions to this for bikes that came too lean from the factory, and they will actually run better with a step up on the Pilot, even if they're completely stock. The only time I really have to get into tuning the Pilot is for big engine upgrades like changing the bore, stroke, or aftermarket carbs. And I'll make a video going into my process for tuning aftermarket carb setups like this Virago with a single Mikuni swap soon. With all that sorted, we're ready to move on to the main circuit. Since tuning is only directly tied to throttle position, I've marked my throttle here for reference to give a visual aid for different inputs. While the main jet does play a small role starting around 20% throttle, it isn't until closer to 80% throttle that it starts to be the main factor, and by wide open, the engine is essentially fueled by the main jet. I like to tune the main by doing what's called a subtle off test. To do this, take the bike out to an open road, ideally with a bit of an incline, and roll into wide open throttle, starting in a high gear at low RPM. For example, here I'm going to start in 4th gear around 3000 RPM. Once I'm at about 7,000 and I have a feel for the bike's pull at full throttle, I'll cut off to about 80% throttle. This simulates going up a jet size. Because fuel is more dense than air, it doesn't react to throttle changes quite as quickly. So the fuel keeps flowing from its inertia almost a second longer than the air does, momentarily enriching the mixture. So if you notice a surge in power and feel some acceleration as you do this, that means that you're too lean on the main jet and you need to go up a step. If you find it stumbles or sputters as you let off, then you're too rich and you need to go down a step. You're looking for a smooth and linear decrease in acceleration as you let off the throttle. Once you've achieved that, the main circuit is really close. But to be safe, I'll usually go one more step up on the main at this point, and if it still feels smooth as I let off wide open throttle, I'll call it good. This is because being slightly rich is safer for the engine at the cost of maybe a little power. Once you're happy with the Pilot circuit and the main jet, it's time to get the mid-range smoothed out. Now, this circuit does have the most parts influencing it, but for the vast majority of situations, simply adjusting the needle will do the job. Things like slide cutaway, emulsion tube, and needle are only really changed out in custom situations. The hardest part about tuning the circuit is being able to tell if it's too lean versus too rich, because both show very similar symptoms. But it's just something that you have to jump into and trust the process. To do this, get on the bike again, and with it fully warmed up, ease through the throttle range from 20 all the way up to about 80%, and feel for any hesitations, a little stumble, dead spots, or anything like that. The best way I can describe lean symptoms are like a surging or a bucking that feels weak, and I don't know why, but I like the word dry. Rich symptoms will be more of a blubbery or sputtery feeling, and it just feels wet to me. But again, these can be so easily confused that I usually just make an educated guess based on what I feel, and I move the clip in that direction first. If you think it's lean, you'll want to drop the clip down towards the sharp end of the needle. This will richen the mid-range by allowing more fuel to come up through the main jet sooner. If you think it's already too rich and you want to lean it out, then you'll move the clip up towards the fat end of the needle. This drops the needle lower in the emulsion tube. Remember, lower is leaner and higher is richer. This is effectively changing when the needle allows fuel to come up through the main jet relative to throttle position. And it often takes a little trial and error, as you may go one step up or down and not really notice much of a difference. But stay strong, you'll get there. It's just a sign that you're a few steps away from where you want to be. Repeat the riding test to feel if it's even slightly worse or better, and either reverse direction if it feels any worse, or keep going in the same direction if it's even slightly better. In most cases, if you're starting in a stock position and have done an intake or exhaust mod, then you're probably going to start moving in the richer direction. And then it's just a matter of how many steps richer to find the smoothest performance. Opening up your intake makes the biggest impact on this circuit, and I usually find no more than 2 clip positions or shims are needed to correct for it. If it seems to need more than that, then the main jet might still need to be richer, since that will allow more fuel throughout the whole mid-range circuit. And that's really all there is to it. If your carb isn't reacting predictably to these tuning strategies, or you just can't seem to get it smoothed out, then there's likely some other factors causing problems. Most commonly, things like ignition timing, vacuum leaks, synchronization, and flooding carbs can make tuning impossible. I'll do some more in-depth videos for troubleshooting and working on these old bikes to make them run like they should, so stay tuned. And let me know what you thought about this video. If you got something from it, leave us a comment, and consider subscribing. I hope this helps, and ride safe.